Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the session. My name is Lucas Drege. I'm a technical evangelist with AgilePoint, and I'll be taking you through the webinar today. Today's topic is One App, Any SharePoint. For those of you who have been in the SharePoint world for some time now, this is a fairly provocative title. We'll go ahead and explain some of the challenges that we've seen with the SharePoint platform and how AgilePoint will seek to address them. Though this is a GoToWebinar session, so you all will be muted, we do want to encourage interaction. So that said, we have a couple of ways of achieving that. First things first, on the GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen, we have a questions panel. Feel free to type in your thoughts there as we're going along. We've set aside about 10 minutes or so at the end of the session to address any questions. And as we're going along here, we also have polls as well. So please do feel free to vote, get your thoughts heard as we're going along here, and we'll discuss those results as a group as we go. Okay, so to the actual content of the webinar, there's going to be a couple of portions to today's session. First things first, I'll go through a few slides just to introduce a few of the concepts that you'll see throughout the session, touch on a few of the ways that AgilePoint can address some of these challenges that we're seeing in the SharePoint market. And then during the second half of the presentation, we'll do a demo. So I have a couple of demo apps queued up here that really highlight the value that AgilePoint brings in the SharePoint context. Okay, so that brings us to the challenge. What is the problem that we're trying to solve today? Well, SharePoint, though it is probably the most ubiquitous content management system in the market today, does have its own challenges, right? And a lot of it comes back to SharePoint trying to be everything to everyone. So for those of you on the line, you're probably familiar with SharePoint sites capabilities, right? These are my team sites, how I share content amongst my team, right, or perhaps across the broader organization, right? While others are using SharePoint as a search tool, right? So maybe you're crawling the content that's within your SharePoint farm or your Office 365 instance, right, as well as content from other enterprise sources, right? Being able to leverage SharePoint as the true front end or true portal to search content enterprise-wide. Right? And while those are really great uses for SharePoint, some of the areas that we found it tends to fall behind are in the area of business apps, right? So when we say business apps, what we mean are really form and workflow-driven applications, right? Maybe things that you've built previously in SharePoint Designer, what have you, right? That's generally where we start to see challenges arise. So what's contributing to this theme, right? What is contributing to this challenge of SharePoint trying to be everything to everyone? And obviously, as a result, some things tend to fall off. Well, if we're going back to the early days when I started with SharePoint, the server-side model, or WSPs, were very popular. This is more akin to your traditional development, where we create a solution package, we roll it up, and we move it from one server to another, right? Hopefully, we're crossing our fingers there, things don't break, right? So that was one of the earlier ways that we saw a lot of our customers customizing SharePoint. Right. In addition, more recently, we heard about the death of InfoPath. Right. This was a solution that was very widely used. Right. A free solution that essentially most of my customers were using pretty heavily, and was a great way to go down this path of business apps. Right. To collect data, to distribute data across maybe my team for an approval. Right. And then obviously using a workflow behind the scenes to drive the process. Right. More recently, we've seen the rise of Flow and Power Apps. Right, definitely a step in the right direction. Microsoft is kind of capitalizing on a lot of the lessons learned in the past, right? But what we're stuck with now is a situation where not only is there not feature parity with Power Apps and InfoPath, right, but we have fundamental differences in Power Apps designers, right? You have one set of capabilities on the desktop, a wholly different set of capabilities available through the browser, right? And obviously that can create a whole lot of challenges. Right, but regardless of how you're building these customizations, right, whether it's a business app, whether it's a dashboard, something like that, there's a few commonalities across all of those. Right, one, we see these solutions resulting in what's called an instant legacy or technical debt. Right, this is a solution that maybe provided business value to the organization for a nominal amount of time before becoming a legacy. The simple reason for that is, a lot of these customizations, they take time to develop. They take time to UAT, right? They take time to deploy into production. And because of that interval, right, oftentimes what we're saying here is it's a situation where it took us so long to get the solution out the door, our business requirements have already evolved since then. In addition, when we're building these solutions in SharePoint, what we result with is either SharePoint version or platform lock, right? So again, going back to one of my prior experiences, we were migrating from SharePoint 2010 to Office 365. It had about 1,000 sites, right? And for each of those sites, we had between 3 to 5 workflows, right? So these were solutions that had been built in SharePoint Designer, and in addition to the migration effort of just the content, every single one of those applications required refactoring, right? In some cases, it was changing a reference to a server that no longer existed, right? What have you. The end result being a number of high-valued resources were essentially dedicated to refactoring these applications, things like PTO, that had really nominal business value to the organization as a whole. So you can think, what could my developers have done elsewhere? Where could they have spent their time, right? And maybe something that's creating a little more value to the organization. So that's really where AgilePoint comes in, right? We've kind of seen this progression of different development tools over the years, right? But they all really result in the same thing, right? So with an AgilePoint application, what we're looking to do is, first of all, lower the bar of entry for these custom applications, right? Not everyone has a professional developer in their organization, right? So being able to build a custom app as a business analyst, right, someone who knows the process perhaps the best, is a real benefit, right? It allows you to work alongside IT, right, as opposed to underneath IT when it comes to building these custom apps. On an ongoing basis, kind of as we just alluded to here, perhaps when we're migrating SharePoint versions or moving to the cloud, right, the TCO of these AgilePoint applications are going to be much lower. We're not refactoring the entirety of the application. We're not changing every single step or action in a workflow. Or maybe changing the data storage mechanism, right? Changing our access token from SharePoint 2013 to SharePoint 2016, right? Other than that, the application works exactly as it should without any other effort on your end. Because these applications are much easier to maintain and can be built by anyone who's essentially not a professional developer, what we're looking at here is the ability to get these apps out the door quickly, right? To validate your MVP, right? To get it in the hands of the business user who can see, who can touch and feel the app, right? And then refine your business requirements from there, right? With the end result being that you're future-proof, right? Regardless of which version of SharePoint your business decides to move to, whether it's on-premises, in the cloud, or hybrid, right? These applications will be ready for the next version of SharePoint, ready for that next platform, right? Even if at some point SharePoint moves away from the picture. So this brings us to what are we going to see today, right? Well, I think some of these we've kind of already touched on already. We'll show a couple of apps that are going to run natively in SharePoint, right? So they're going to run against native SharePoint artifacts, a list or a library. These apps are going to be complete end-to-end applications. So they'll be comprised of a form UI. In some cases, it's going to be SharePoint. In some cases, it'll be a more engaging, more robust AgilePoint form, as well as a workflow engine. So we need to route this process to the different people within my organization to ensure that the right decision points are made. In addition to these very SharePoint-centric apps, we'll also show you cross-platform apps that are really surfaced through SharePoint. Right, so for those of you who are maybe very comfortable with the UI of SharePoint, your users love it, right? This is a great way to surface apps that maybe don't have anything to do with SharePoint at all, right? Could be Salesforce, could be SAP. Right, so a number of different options here, all surfaced through one place. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch out of my slide deck, and I'm going to move to my, my demo environment. All right, so what you're seeing here is the AgilePoint homepage, sort of a landing page for everything AgilePoint. Right, within this UI here, I can receive and manage tasks that have been allocated to me. I can build new applications or extend existing legacy apps. Right, maybe some of you have apps that are built in Access. Right, so extending legacy apps as well. Reporting and dashboards, whether it's on a scheduled basis or something you want to develop ad hoc, as well as collaboration with your colleagues. That said, today's demo is going to be more focused in the context of SharePoint. So what I've done here is I've moved from the AgilePoint portal to my standard Office 365 team site. And what you'll see here is I've added an app from the App Store that gives me a lot of that AgilePoint capability directly in the context of SharePoint, right? A UI that I'm familiar with, right, where I spend the majority of my day. Now, this is just one example, right? Can certainly surface this dashboard in a number of other enterprise systems, right? We mentioned SAP in the past, Salesforce and NetSuite, right? So just an example, something to keep in mind, right? We can actually pick up a process started in SAP, go into my SharePoint UI, action a task there, right? So it's really about surfacing these tasks in the systems that make the most sense, right? This demo is going to focus around SharePoint, so that's where we'll be spending the majority of our time today. Okay, so to give you a sense of what this looks like here, I can come into the AgilePoint dashboard and I can get a sense of all of the tasks that have been assigned to me, right, and perhaps when they're due. So really helpful to have this calendar view, right? You can see here I have a few tasks that have been waiting for me, right? Looks like this PTO request here is slightly overdue, whereas I have an invoice processing app that I need to finish out by the end of the week. Right, so really helpful to have just a single pane view into all of the tasks that have been assigned, right? Regardless of whether it's a SharePoint-based application, whether it's an SAP or a Salesforce-based app, I have flexibility here in terms of how I pick up these applications. Okay. So to start off our first demo, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up this document review library here. Pretty standard library. So what I'll do is I'm going to drop a document into this library here, and this is going to kick off our process. So I have just a simple Word document that I'm going to add to this library, and behind the scenes, what this has done is it's kicked off a process. Now this is just one example, one way that we can initiate a workflow, right? By dropping a document into a library, an item into a list, what have you, right? But perhaps, maybe it's when a document has been edited, right? A major version has been published, or you just want a form submission to kick off a process. We have a lot of options here with AgilePoint. This is just one of them. So what I'll do here is I'll go back to my AgilePoint dashboard and I'm going to refresh my task list here. You'll see I have a document review task waiting for me. So I'm just going to open up this end user reporting view here just to show you sort of an outline of the process, what's happening here. So to kind of set the stage, what we're doing here is we're executing a document management process. So this process is going to manage all the way from the inception of a document through revisions and publication, right? So the end goal here is to put a document through its paces, make sure it's reviewed by the right folks, right? Then ultimately publish it for some sort of external consumption, right? Whether it's going on my website, going to my extranet, right? What have you. Okay. So when I select this task here from my flyout menu, I have a number of options out of the box, right? We saw a few process just a second ago. Reassign task is really helpful if you want to kick back the task to someone else, right? Maybe I have a lot on my plate, right? I can't handle this today. There's another colleague of mine who is equally competent and can take that on for me. Task rework, just going to be helpful if perhaps there was data entered incorrectly in the initial stage, right? Maybe we missed a certain field that we were supposed to fill in, right? Task rework is great for that, as well as create linked work item. So far what we've shown is how we can automate a process that's very well defined, but AgilePoint also excels in sort of these unstructured scenarios as well. Right, so perhaps in the context of this document review, I need to bring in a subject matter expert, someone who's particularly well versed in the subject of this document. I want their feedback. So even though we hadn't accounted for it in our process, I can bring in an external party to my workflow. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this task. And you'll see the UI here is changing from the document library UI to the AgilePoint forms. Right, so we've added some basic branding. This can be completely customized with your own CSS or your own JS should you so desire. But this is built completely in a drag and drop methodology here, so no code required in this application. So I can open the document that's been assigned to me. Right, I can look through, see if anyone's added comments so far. Looks like someone has. We don't want to archive this document. We want to publish it for external consumption. So I'm going to say go ahead and approve yes. If I had selected no, what that would do is it would kick it back to my originator. They can then make some edits to their document and resubmit it for processing. But for now, what I'll do is I'll just click submit here. and we'll see this light up here in just a second. You can see that that's starting to take the path here. So things are moving along very well. Okay, great. In just a moment, I should get a notification indicating that the document has been published, so we'll wait for that here in just a moment. But while I'm doing that here, I want to get my other demo queued up because it's certainly a stark contrast from what we saw just a moment ago. Right, the demo just a second ago was really designed around routing a document for approval. This is going to be a much more visually driven process. Right, so this is actually not. Oh, there's my notification indicating that document has been published. So that's great. But this is actually an application that we built for the doctor's office. Right, we essentially wanted them to have a way that they can capture some data from their patients as they're sitting in the waiting room, so that once they actually see the doctor, there's some intelligence that we can act upon here. So you can see in the context of this demonstration, we have essentially two pain points, pardon the pun. We have the head and then everything related to the heart. So we'll go ahead and take the brain here. First question is, do we get seizures? Not really, not that often. Do I get headaches? Yes, absolutely. How often? Okay. So you can see here, right, I mean, we still have that same capability in terms of dynamic actions. Right, so even though this was a very visually driven form, right, we still have the if this, then that sort of scenario, right, where if I selected headaches, it's dynamically going to pop up a field that asks me how often. Nope, no numbness or tingling in my arms. And I do feel slightly nauseous, yes. So we get a nice summary, right, of all the data points that we've entered. And essentially, right, this is what we then can deliver to our doctor, right? Scroll down the page here so I can submit that. We could optionally go through the heart checklist as well, but I think for demonstration purposes, you get the idea here. And if I were to go back to my task list, you'll see here I have the brain diagnosis waiting for me. So you're certainly not limited to data-driven forms. It doesn't have to be all about data entry. As you can see here, right, we can make things very visual and very engaging for the user as well. Now, it is important to point out that this solution was customized with some CSS and some JavaScript. So this is sort of extending the out-of-the-box capabilities slightly, but certainly within the realm of most developers, I would say. All right, so we can go in as a doctor now. I can review the data that my patient has gathered for me, and perhaps that will help me make some sort of diagnosis as to the next steps to take with my patient. So that concludes the demos that I wanted to show for today. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a quick second. I'm going to switch back to my slide deck, and we'll conclude the webinar here. All right, great. Okay, so just in closing here, wanted to take some questions from the audience, seeing a couple queue up here, and we still have about 6 or 7 minutes by my watch. Okay, so a couple of questions around licensing are coming up here. So what are the licensing options that AgilePoint provides? So we have a couple of different licensing models. We found that the flexibility here, really allows you to target, certain areas of your organization if you wanted to roll out a process, right? So in addition to the standard, named user license where, user A consumes a seat, right? We do also have the concept of a concurrent or shared user license, right? So this is kind of what I was alluding to a moment ago, right? Where perhaps an organization has, one big application that they want to roll out, right? Maybe 100 people will be touching it, in total, right? You don't want to buy a license for everyone in your organization, right? So the concurrent model is a great fit, right? It's really about paying for capacity, right? What are you using at any given time, right? So that's a great way to start rolling out AgilePoint, right? And certainly the licensing model accommodates that. In addition to the named or concurrent user license, we do also have an unlimited license, right? So that's really helpful for large enterprises, right? What we'll do there is we'll base it off of the number of cores on your AgilePoint server, right? And that gives you that sort of all you can eat, don't have to worry about managing your license type of capability. Great question. I have a couple of questions coming in around integration. So first, do you integrate with Salesforce? Do you support Lightning? Yes, we do absolutely support Salesforce. Similar to SharePoint, that's a native integration for us. So we're in the App Exchange. That's the Salesforce store. And I believe the second part of the question is, do you support Lightning? Yes, 100%. So Lightning is the new UI, UI look and feel from Salesforce, really supposed to gear towards easier customizations of the UI and things like that. So regardless, whether you're using Salesforce Classic, Salesforce Lightning, we support both with a single-click migration between the two. All right, so great question. Thanks for that. Another integration question. Do we integrate with Planner? Yes. So Planner is Microsoft's newer, so I guess it would say task management tool, rolled up in the Office 365 suite. It essentially provides to-do information. If some of you have used Trello, it's very similar along those same lines. So to get back to that question, we do support Planner. That's actually a great question because we do have a very powerful integration with that. So what happens essentially is, once you've defined sort of your project tasks, your due dates, your owners, etc., you have essentially a to-do list, right? These items are due on such and such a day by such and such an owner. So what we do is we actually take that MPP file, that Microsoft Project Plan file, and we feed it to AgilePoint. And what we do there is we essentially process enable it. So we'll take all of your milestones and all of your tasks and their owners, and we'll automatically generate a workflow and Forms UI for you. Right, so great question, very deep integration there, and actually I think a topic of one of our subsequent webinars, so thank you for stealing my thunder. Okay, last question here. What type of environments can we deploy in? So I'm guessing that question is getting at deployment models, deployment strategies. So traditionally, what we've done, we've been an on-premises solution, I would say, since our inception, probably until the last 4 or 5 years or so. Since then, we've come out with a couple of different cloud offerings as well. We're running the same code base across all of these deployment models, so if you ultimately change your mind, you want to take advantage of cloud or you want to bring it back in-house, all of your AgilePoint applications migrate seamlessly. But to speak to the cloud component, we do offer a multi-tenant public cloud, right? So this is a shared environment that was going to run on either AWS or Windows Azure, as well as private clouds, right? So there we've worked with Aliyun, we've worked with, again, AWS, Azure, and that obviously provides you a whole lot more control over the environment than the public cloud would. So we have those 3 options, right? Public cloud, private cloud, as well as the data center edition. Okay, and just as a last comment here before we close up, for any of you who are moving from one version of SharePoint to another, considering a move to the cloud, please give us a call. I hope what you found here throughout the course of this session is that these AgilePoint applications provide a tremendous amount of business value and are quite easy to maintain, to refine as you're going along, right, as your business continues to mature. So we can certainly provide a huge amount of value to any SharePoint or Office 365 deployment. Okay, and with that concludes our webinar. So thank you everyone for attending. The slides and the recording will be available post the session, so please be on the lookout for that shortly. All right, bye-bye.